hello, one and all, and welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard. I am Paul Elam from paulelam.com, and I am joined as always by the absolutely wonderful Janice Fiamengo of the Fiamengo Files and the magnificent Tom Golden of MenAreGood.com. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the land of Guinness and what is happening there in young people's education. They make great beer in Ireland, what can I say? And they make good whiskey too. Making social justice, as it appears these days, because they've decided that the boys should have their grades discounted simply for being boys. If you have a penis, that's marks off. We're not kidding about this. We're going to show you a little video about what's happening with that, and then we'll have a discussion afterward. Tom, you want to roll the video for us?
Okay, so this is a big story. The government of Ireland has an official policy where boys will automatically be given lower grades just for being boys. This is in regards to the leaving certificates, which is a very important part of going to college. Look at the headline: girls do better than boys in calculated grade leaving cert exams as gender trends will be built into results. Now, this is actually the law, so this is official. It's mandatory. Now, keep in mind what this means. This means the government is making it so boys get lower grades automatically under law. That is now the law in Ireland, that boys must get lower grades.
Okay, so there you have it in short summary. Girls are to make better grades than boys, which they were apparently, according to this article, already doing, and unsatisfied with that. And then you bring in the COVID to the situation. They've decided they're going to manufacture everybody's grades, which is an interesting concept in and of itself. Hey, we're not comfortable taking the test all in the same classroom, so let's just give everybody a grade. And by the way, let's make sure that girls have higher grades than boys. Seems legit to me. By the way, a lot of this article was focused around communication between whoever's handling education in Ireland and the Sinn Féin party, which has a glorious history of bank robbery and bomb making. But it's, I mean, in order to achieve a political agenda, Sinn Féin, by the way, is an avowed democratic socialist organization that does have a history of violence, but now apparently they're wanting to achieve their political goals in different ways. And it starts by putting a foot on the neck of boys in school. Not happy to see this.
Wow.
What do you guys have to say?
Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. You know, we saw that little video clip, but also there's an article in the Independent, which I think is a major publication in Ireland. And the first sentence in the article says this. Are you ready for this? The calculated grading system being used for this year's leaving certificate has been designed to ensure that overall girls will do better than boys. What? I mean, they just admit that. They just put it out front. It's crazy.
Yeah. Imagine if it were the other way around.
Oh, boom! The world will explode.
The other side of Sinn Féin coming in.
Oh, yeah, right.
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. And yet, contrary to what the young fellow who made that little video in which he reads select portions of the article and comments on the obvious unfairness of it all, and his name was what? We'll include a link, I guess, to his video and encourage everybody to go.
Great little video. We'll leave a link to it. And Blue Orange, I think was his name.
Yes,
Blue Orange.
Tip of the hat to Blue Orange.
Yes.
Please sub to his channel. I know he's out there doing yeoman's work.
Thanks for covering it, Blue Orange. And
Yes.
But, contrary to what he says, well, he's absolutely right. This is a big story in terms of what it says about what's going on in Ireland and in the world at large. But ironically, it has not been a particularly big story. It has not been covered in multiple papers. It has not been front page news. It has not been, the subject of panel discussions and calls for royal commissions of inquiry and all the things that one would expect, and which would be the case if the headline said the opposite, that boys would be given higher grades as a matter of course than girls. And so, yeah, this is amazing. I mean, the other thing about the story is that article, which Blue Orange reads out and which we've all read, is not really very clear at all. It's very difficult to tell reading it what exactly is going on, what kind of system is being used and why it's being used in the way it's being used. And I mean, it's a very confusing article, but as far as I could understand it, the issue is that because of COVID-19, schools closed in Ireland, I don't know when exactly, sometime in March, I assume, maybe even a little bit earlier. And they did not have the students write their school leaving exams, the results of which are very important to their grade overall, I guess. And so now they are going to calculate, use an aggregate of the work that the students did manage to do. But rather than simply total up the work, the marks that they got on tests so far and the marks that they got on their assignments and essays, they're going to try to rig the whole system so that it reflects the outperformance by girls of boys, which is a trend in Ireland as it is, all across the Western world. Yep. So there's no surprise about that. And as Blue Orange pointed out in his little video, why does it need to be calculated? If it is already a trend that boys do worse than girls in school, then wouldn't simply calculating up the results of all the work that they had done up until the point that the schools closed, wouldn't that have been sufficient to show how boys had been faring in relation to girls without any kind of tinkering? But clearly that it is not. So they are going to tinker with the grades and in order to make sure that girls overall get higher grades than boys.
And think of the silliness. I mean, for boys who are really bright, who did very well, they automatically, their grades come down just because they have a penis.
Yeah.
And girls who were pretty dumb, who didn't do well at all, they get floated up simply because they have a vagina. This is crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. And, by the way, the reason I found out about this whole thing to begin with was Moiret Allegiere, who did an article on this. We'll link that one below.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
In his usual way, he pinpoints it and tears it up. So have a look at that article. It's well worth seeing. But it's absolutely insane the way they're using quotas, basically, and averages to be able to pump up the girls and bring down the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's important to point out, too, that this is more like an end result of what's been happening in schools. Mm-hmm. And it's not just in Ireland. Boys used to academically excel in schools. And the feminists took care of that. They sent in feminist ideologues to be school teachers. This is part of their education. Boys have been derogated by the educational system. They've been demonized and vilified. Their ways of learning and their needs in school have been ignored. Their needs for kinetic what am I looking for?
Outlet.
Outlet. Yes, a kinetic outlet. Instead of getting that, they're taking those opportunities away from boys and demonizing their more physical natures.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Building up girls with girl power programs and how girls are wonderful. And these have been going through our schools. And certainly there's nothing wrong with encouraging high self-esteem in young students of either sex. There's certainly nothing wrong with that at all. But this hasn't been that. This has been a campaign to deify young girls and demonize young men.
Exactly.
And their education has fallen behind because of it. And so what's the response to that? Let's make them fall behind some more.
I know.
Let's take some more points because we haven't beaten them enough.
I mean, look at the research on grading. And it's really clear. The teachers tend to be biased. Mostly female teachers in these younger grades, and they don't like the boys. I mean, I've done a whole series of boys in education. You might we'll link that one in there too, because it's amazing how much they've studied and found that these female teachers, really don't like the boys. And they're going to give higher grades to the students they like. Therefore, the girls get higher grades. And the whole thing about the, what's it called? The stereotype threat, where they now see that if a group is seen as being stereotyped in a negative way, they're probably going to do worse. And can you imagine how boys have been stereotyped over and over again? They're the sex that causes the problems. Yeah. They're the sex that oppresses women. They're the sex that this and that and the other. That's huge amount of stereotyping. So of course they're going to do worse. There's just over and over again all kinds of things that are obvious that makes boys' grades lower. And then they do this on top of it. It's like, that's insulting.
Yeah. Yeah, if this were a case where any other group in society, identifiable group, were obviously doing worse, and then on top of that, there was a move by the Department of Education to make sure that they did worse, it would prompt, and rightly so, a whole flurry of questions and calls to study to study the problem, right. Asking, why is this group doing poorly? And what are we doing about it? What are we doing to try to help this group do better? And none of that seems to come out of this. It's just one newspaper article and very little concerted attention. And it goes on business as usual. And as both of you say, this is the result of decades of conscious programming and feminist activism. There's an interesting article actually by Christina Hoff Sommers, who of course wrote the book, The War Against Boys. And this is an article called The War Against Boys that was published in the Atlantic magazine some years ago. And she actually gives a history of how, starting in the 1980s, feminist ideologues made the claim that it was girls that were in trouble. Right. And that girls had low self-esteem, girls were shy and retiring, girls needed to be encouraged. And, as a result, of course, many feminist activists started up gender equity, commissions, and, all sorts of centers were founded in order to... How
close is all that to chauvinist stereotypes about girls? It mirrors them exactly.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Hoff Sommers' article is that she makes the claim that all of this was based on nothing. It was a fantasy in feminist minds. Yes. There was no research showing that this was actually the case. In fact, the research showed that most girls, well, both boys and girls, of course, go through a period in adolescence where they have self-doubt and problems with confidence and all sorts of issues. But they all, in general, if they're encouraged properly, they come through. And certainly there was no evidence that girls were suffering a disproportionate crisis of confidence that was affecting their schooling. Quite the opposite. Girls were doing quite well. And she finds that a particular feminist ideologue who really started this whole trend, a woman named Carol Gilligan, who's still a celebrated feminist theorist, seems to have actually manufactured some of these so-called study results, which were never made public when Christina Hoff Sommers attempted to consult the studies to determine, where she'd come up with these figures and these ideas. Anyway, so it's a fascinating article about how this was a manufactured crisis. It prompted a flurry of activism on the part of feminists and, of course, gynocentric men as well, who are happy to help them along, all sorts of programs to encourage and advantage girls over boys. And now, this is the result. And yet you cannot get people to see that this is a real problem. Even teachers who will notice that in their classrooms, boys are not doing better than girls, quite the opposite. They will still, if questioned about it, assume that this doesn't reflect the larger reality. So there is still this idea that in general, girls need to be encouraged. And of course, many female teachers, many of whom are feminists, are quite happy to give girls slightly better grades, partly as a feminist gesture of social justice, to give them that leg up that supposedly they are denied in society.
Right.
It's remarkable. And you find articles like a terrible article written by a woman named Jane Caro, an Australian, responding to Hoff Sommers and others' calls about the problem for boys. She wrote an article called "How to Help Boys." No, I haven't got the exact title. I've got it here. "How to Help Boys Do Better at School." This was published in the Sydney Herald. Stop giving them a leg up in the outside world. This was an article in which Caro actually argued that the reason, she finally admitted it's true, boys are doing much worse than girls at school. She had finally admitted that, and her explanation for it was that boys know they're privileged. And so they know they don't have to work hard in school. They'll still end up doing better. And so that's why they throw away their, I mean, the lack of empathy, the disdain, the hatred for boys and young men couldn't be clearer. And yet that's published and receives a positive response from our gynocentric society. That was in 2016, and I'll send it along so we can include a link if anybody wants to look at it. So yeah, this is this massive problem, and yet the denial of it, or even the embracing of it and celebration of it on the part of feminist ideologues remains the prominent response.
And look at the overall, the big result of this. Right now, we have, on average, in most American universities, down the road from all this warped educational outlook that we start children out with, we've got nearly 60-40 split female to male in people getting undergraduate degrees. We've got $1.8 trillion in student loan debt. 2/3 of that belongs to women, mostly with humanities degrees that can't even get them jobs. And so what we do is we're propping up girls throughout the education system from the time they enter. We're telling them that they're special, that they're better, that they're important, that their choices are absolutely infallible, that boys are bad. And that is a continued stream from from grade school to grad school.
Yeah.
We're seeing the same exact pattern in the educational system, and guys are just starting to drop out, and nobody's noticing this as a problem. This is like not a big deal. The ones that are going are still tending to go more for STEM degrees, and despite millions and millions of dollars spent and massive outreach programs, they still can't get girls to populate STEM fields the same way boys do.
I wonder why.
Sexual harassment, Tom.
Yes,
there's a lot of
harassment, discrimination.
Yeah.
And Paul, you mentioned the whole 60-40 thing, and that just blows my mind, because 1960, it was 60% guys in college and 40% girls in college, and they called that discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
They called that oppression. They called that a real problem that needed to be fixed. But now that it's reversed, and it's the girls are 60 and the boys are 40, it's empowerment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you still hear, all you ever hear about is the STEM problem. The so-called leaky pipeline, that we're not able to keep girls in the hard sciences and engineering, and we need to do all sorts of things to promote them and to fast track their careers, and to give them scholarships, etc. And complete silence about the fact that in the Faculty of Education, the ratio is something like, it's in the range of 75 to 25 female to male, that in the social sciences it's it's
Way out
majority
Yeah.
female.
Yeah.
That in the health sciences, it's majority female. That in law, it's now majority female. That in medicine, it's majority female. There's no worry about that. There's no sane discussion about the implications of that down the road. And, the implications are vast, because often women are not interested in taking up these careers in a full-time way, or they
Right.
do take them up, for a few years full-time. Then they want to drop back to part-time. It means that it's very difficult to find doctors,
Right.
for example. I
Right.
mean, there are all sorts of
Wonder why men
implications.
make more money.
Yeah, that too. And that's always the response whenever you point out, look at this massive gender balance. And then feminists will say, hey, but men still make more money. Yeah, that's because they work overtime and they
Yes.
work a much higher number of hours because of the choices that women make. But, it's enough to fuel the feminist ideologues to keep on pushing women into these various areas and to scream discrimination if women choose not to devote themselves to STEM. It's it's just pushing men out constantly, and it's a terrifying thing, actually. I remember reading a really interesting article by our friend William Collins about what was done to physics education some years ago, and this is in the United Kingdom, but I'm sure the same thing was going on in North American education as well, because physics was one of the few areas where boys still excelled over girls, and the school administrators and the pedagogues couldn't stand that. So they changed physics to make it more interesting to girls, meaning it became less about physics, because girls just are not as interested as boys in, neutrons and electrons and all the numbers and, all that stuff. They made it more.
Math is hard.
Yeah, they made it more about the social history of physics. So a huge component of it became women in physics, minorities in physics, what you can do with physics, why physics matters in the world, and the numeracy element, which is the part that is fascinating for those nerdy, smart boys that care about those kinds of things. That got watered down. And as a result, they're trying to make every subject safe for girls to excel in, and it means that no subject is safe for boys anymore. There is no place where boys, especially those kinds of boys who are probably off the charts in intelligence and who incline that way, there's no place for them to be able to flourish and to feel the joy of learning. And so we're literally excluding a whole range of boys who could be making important contributions to important subjects, and watering down education for all.
Yeah, and pushing in people who are not really that interested in it. I got a story for you. I was listening, this was years ago, I was listening to an interview of a trans man, and he was talking about his transition and all the testosterone he took.
Yeah.
And one of the things he pointed out was, before I transitioned, before I took a lot of testosterone, I flunked physics. I flunked it. But once I started taking a lot of testosterone, I understood it. Think about it.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
Sure is.
Just taking a lot of testosterone helped this guy to really understand physics in a different kind of way. I think that tells us a lot. I think that there's so much more going on biologically. Not that it's, the biggest piece of anything, but there's a little piece of that in there that testosterone people are going to understand it.
Wasted.
What's that?
It's really too bad that that's wasted, because now you don't really have to understand physics.
I know.
Just understand how physics has discriminated against women since the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Oh, bang is a bad word though, Paul.
Oh yeah, well yeah. There's all kinds, but this is how we end up. We've got women in attendance at Harvard Law now, who are saying we shouldn't have to study criminal law that applies to rape because it might be triggering. Seriously.
Yeah,
and
it's
the school
quite
has
serious.
capitulated.
Yeah.
Well, firemen shouldn't go to fires because that would be triggering too.
Yeah, no, it's really to deny that the feminization of all of these various fields of higher education and professions, to deny that isn't having really serious negative consequences for the integrity of the fields themselves is just foolishness, because you can't help but see that it is. And to think that you can exclude men from the endeavors and the fields of study and the fields of activity that they have traditionally excelled in, and that's not going to have a really negative impact on our society at large. Well, it's very, very worrisome. So, I mean, what's the response? You would think that if there were an article like this with a headline like this, that people would be saying, hold on, why are boys getting lower grades to begin with? Are boys not as smart as girls? There's no evidence that that's the case. In fact, there's evidence that at the higher levels of achievement and brilliance, boys outnumber girls quite significantly. So why is that not reflected in their grades at school? What's going on in the schools? Is it because teachers are giving girls higher grades for various reasons? Is it because the schools are doing something wrong? Why aren't we having these conversations at the highest levels? And why aren't we?
Carol Gilligan doesn't want us to.
Yeah, exactly. Carol Gilligan and all of that sisterhood absolutely does not want that conversation to take place. And this is an issue that has been raised for decades.
And the sisterhood is now academia, and it's the media, and it's Hollywood, and it's our legislators. Mm-hmm. The sisterhood is everything.
It's everything.
And there's another problem. You've got men and women, grown men and women with boys, have 2 or 3 boy children, go into school, read this article, and sit right there on their ass doing nothing. About it, not going to the school and saying, you explain why you're taking points away from my son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they should be marching in the streets about this, and they would be if it were about girls. And that is the thing. We have got to encourage, parents have got to start saying, this stops with my son.
Yes. And, I got an email yesterday from someone who I know, and he wrote me, he said, do you think this sounds like a good plan? And he gave me this plan of what he was going to do for his 3rd grade son's class. And part of it was he was going to go into the teacher and ask for the curriculum first. He was going to see the whole curriculum, and he was going to then say, I don't want him to be part of this. I don't want him to be part of that. And it's like, it was really a nice summary of how to deal with the school system. And I'm going to do a video on that, I think, because it was a great, he said, is this a good idea? I said, a good idea. I'm going to tell everybody about that, because it was really well done. Because we need to start impacting the systems. We need to start going in there and saying, no, you're not going to do that to our boys.
Yeah, exactly. We need coalitions of parents organizing around this issue, saying we are going to advocate for our sons. We are not going to allow this any longer. It's astounding that it has not happened.
It really is.
It's astounding that you still have fathers talking about what they want to do for their daughters, but somehow allowing, really dreadful discrimination against their boys. But I know some fathers who are now saying, and some mothers too, who are now saying, I'm not going to stand for this with my sons. And that's what's needed.
Yes. That is exactly what's needed.
They shouldn't be standing for it for the girls either.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. For our children.
Girls, they put them in an education system that gives them a false sense of themselves. They end up crushed by student loan debt, unemployable, and angry and hating their fathers. Mm-hmm. That's what the education system does for our girls. Yeah. And for people to, I don't understand how people just sit here and watch this stuff.
And guess what?
And write checks every month.
Yeah. What they call empower. Oh, sorry, Tom. Go
ahead, Janice.
I was just going to say what they call empowerment actually weakens. It weakens these young women's character. Yes. It weakens their ability to withstand criticism or hardship. I mean, it creates all sorts of problems for them.
And guess what? If girls end up hating their fathers, they're never going to have a good relationship.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
They're never going to have a good relationship. It's going to suck. Yeah. So we're killing our whole culture.
It's the recipe for
Show me a radical feminist who had a great relationship with their father. Oops, you can't.
Yeah, ask Mallory Millet about that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, good for her. We haven't seen Mallory for a while. It'd be good to say hello to her.
Yeah,
Yes, it
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why there isn't more of a push for single-sex schools as well. We need boys to be taught by men.
Yes.
I can understand why men don't want to go into primary school teaching in a co-ed school. It's way too dangerous for them. But if in a single-sex school, we have men teaching boys and allowing them to flourish in the way they need to do and can do, I think the results would be tremendous.
In an environment that's boy-friendly. You know, there's this school in
Exactly.
D.C., and I forget the name of the school. Sorry, guys. But there's a school where it's all boys, and when the boys come in, they're assigned a team. You're either on the blue team or the red team. And from that point forward, anything you do, whether it's your deportment, whether it's your grades, whether it's your after-school stuff, goes to points for your team. So there's a huge competition between the two teams. They love it. These boys love it. And they'll kick ass in order to make more points for their team. And of course, they learn a lot, you know. This is using boys' interests and skills and nature to be able to help them learn, which is the exact opposite of what our stupid educational system's doing.
No, I know. I mean, they're supposed to get in little groups and, you know, talk about, you know,
their
some
feelings.
issue.
Talk about their feelings.
Talk about stifling, you know, any natural, well, all of the natural curiosity and intellectual chops that they all have. And it's really sad.
Yep, they're taught a lifetime of sleeping alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Both boys and girls.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, do we have a Puta in the midst of all this?
Ooh, I guess Foley would be the one, eh?
Yeah, the Minister of Education, Foley. Yeah, that she can stand up there with a straight face and justify this as having to, you know, creating the most, I think she said at one point, equitable outcome possible. Wow. Yeah.
Well, and we should reserve something for the leadership of Sinn Féin too, because Sinn Féin, being a woman's organization now, probably needs the recognition.
Now let's hear a quote from her. In order to make sure that the standardization process works, there'll be a validation, including any necessary rebalancing to preserve girls' advantage on higher grades as seen in previous years. That's our Puta.
Yeah.
There's Puta right there. Yeah, that's a flying Puta for sure.
That's flyer, boy. That's a flyer indeed.
Oh boy.
Are we finished?
I think we are.
I think we are.
It's a good one. It was fun today.
Just take a quick moment to thank all the new members of Regarding Men.
Yes.
Welcome. We are so happy that you're here. And I, for one, have really been enjoying these groups that we're doing. They're absolutely awesome.
Me too.
So
Me
don't
too.
forget, guys, that we are getting a reminder system set up. We're in the process for that, so you'll be seeing that on the group schedule.
Yes. And it's just wonderful meeting all these new men too.
Yeah.
You know, it's really it's been very fulfilling.
Yes, it has.
It feels so good to have a community where men can tell their truth. You know, like Paul's idea of sitting around a campfire. You know, it's kind of like that. That. So come on and join us.
We got a spot for you by the fire, guys.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And
Men are
good.
One of these
We
days,
find a different way to screw it up every time. That's
I'll
great.
tell you what, I don't know what's going to come first, a vaccine or us saying in order the way we should.
Oh, God. It's all Janice's fault.
Yes, it is. There's no doubt. All right, you guys have a good one.
We'll see you
next time.
then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tears coming out my eyes. I'm laughing so hard.